Hi, my name is Alex Ketchum. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of History at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the use for history in battling climate change. Climate change is an issue that affects our present and future, so why bother looking backwards? My research shows the importance of looking at the history of past environmental movements in order to gain insight on how to fix our current dilemma of climate change. Past generations of activists have proffered valuable solutions and raised important questions that, although sometimes ignored by their contemporaries, can inform current conversations about environmentalism. Valuing histories of activism empowers us in the battle against climate change. My talk today uses the specific example of feminist food and environmental activists to provide a framework of how history is a valuable field in our current struggle against environmental degradation. However, this methodology is not just restricted to the historical actors who I am discussing, but rather various activists of the past. Food production and consumption are prominent fronts of the climate change battle. In trying to solve these issues, though, we need to make sure that we are not inflicting other forms of violence. Our solutions must take into account the fact that we live in an unequal world and that some proposed solutions to climate change may add burden or further oppress different groups of people due to factors like differences in race, gender, class, sexual orientation, age, and able-bodiedness. Current activists trying to combat climate change need to keep this in mind and to keep in mind the intersectional oppressions and the ways that food, social, and environmental health are connected. Debates over who is responsible for North American eating habits and their social and environmental impact are not new. My research on feminist food activists in the United States and Canada shows that these discussions happened in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. Looking at the solutions proposed by these different feminist groups during that period provides valuable insight into how to remedy North America's current food and environmental health issues while already taking gender dynamics into account. With the exception of Warren Belasco's Appetite for Change from 1989, academics have largely ignored how some feminists during the period focused on the labor issues surrounding cooking while being fully aware of the importance of food and cooking for health and environmental reasons. According to Statistics Canada's 2012 report and the Centre of Disease Control's 2014 National Diabetes Statistics Report, type 2 diabetes is an epidemic affecting over 6.5% of Canadians and over 9.3% of the population in the United States. Over the past 4 decades, North Americans have steadily increased the number of pre-prepared meals they consume each week, and these habits contribute to higher rates of obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. Slow Food International, a global organization focused on linking the pleasure of good food with a commitment to local communities and the environment, believes that home cooking can ameliorate these problems. Prominent food journalist Michael Pollan echoes this sentiment by claiming that bringing back the family dinner is a panacea of sorts, not only for personal health, but environmental problems. However, most of the proposed solutions for this problem of diabetes, the proposed solution is often the home-cooked dinner, which is disembodied without regard for the gendered labor behind the process. Women continue to be the primary cooks of most households, and thus not only find themselves with the burden of having to decide how to feed their families, but that they also shoulder much of the public criticism for these nutritional and environmental problems. While the current statistics regarding diet-related illness are recent, debates over who is responsible for North American eating habits and who should cook are not new. My research shows that these discussions happened amongst feminists beginning in the 1960s and 1970s. Looking at the solutions proposed by these different feminist groups during that period provides valuable insight into how to remedy North America's current food and nutritional health issues while already taking gender dynamics into account. And to clarify, I'm not saying that feminist activists and women of previous generations did not think about health and nutritional issues prior to the 1960s and 1970s, but rather I am saying that by looking at this period of the 1960s and 1970s, we can see the approach that certain feminists took to not only looking at health issues of their families, but also health issues of the environment and what they were cooking. And I also don't want to keep it just within the realm of families, although much of the language used in the materials that I'll be examining for this discussion do use the word family and family-based rhetoric. In 1971, Judy Cyphers famously wrote, "I want a wife who will plan the menus, do the grocery shopping, prepare the meals, serve them pleasantly, and then do the cleaning up while I do my studying." Pat Minority, who wrote in 1970 the piece The Politics of Housework, and Jane O'Reilly's The Housewife's Moment of Truth, similarly provided feminist critiques focused on the physical and emotional labor of cooking. Coming out of the consciousness-raising groups of the late 1960s and early 1970s, feminists during the second wave generated a multitude of articles criticizing the social expectation that women be the primary cooks and cleaners within their household. Bae Friedan's The Feminist Mystique from 1963 is one of the most famous examples, and her influence has been largely documented by other academics. So these writers and activists point to problems about the lack of respect, the pull away from other economic tasks, fatigue, and the burden of being perfect. However, apart from bringing up the class and gender dynamics of cooking, other feminists include the intersection of environmental issues. For example, the owners of Bloodroot Feminist Vegetarian Restaurant of Bridgeport, Connecticut commented, "We don't use meat not only because it's not healthy, but because we equate the oppression of women with that of animals. As women, we do not want to profit from the sale of animal flesh." They also viewed the meat industry as environmentally deleterious and only served vegetarian food. Feminist writers and activists of the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s looked at the way that their position as the domestic producers of meals within North America was a way they could impact the environment. They saw how they could discourage the consumption of meat and dairy. They could boycott food producers that released toxic chemicals or mistreated their workers. They could buy from local sources, cutting down on transportation costs and putting money into their local communities, and so forth. They're also able to offer a critique of other models of the more prominent environmental movements of the period. For example, due to these environmental considerations, many feminists did not want to participate at all in the system of industrialized food supply. Some women who were aware of these ecological issues and were oftentimes involved in the environmental movements themselves argued for joining cooperatives, referred to as co-ops, to buy their food. The 1974 Collectives newsletter, a feminist publication of the northeastern United States, reported on an October conference with different collectives and co-ops meeting to stay in touch. In order to, unquote, deal with their present economic system, they talked at length about how food co-ops have been combining their buying cooperation to increase savings, quality, and variety. This led them to consider areas in which collectives might work together to fulfill mutual needs, end quote. Independent cooperatives allowed feminists, ecologists, and environmentalists to opt out of the harmful industrial food system. For some material feminists, environmentalism was a very important issue of social justice, and the co-op option seemed like a more moral and, for some, a feminist way in which to procure their food. However, the emphasis of this move towards co-ops in some environmentalist writings about food showed some of the divides between the environmental and feminist movements. These pieces focused on where the food came from and not at all about who would prepare the food once it was purchased. Whereas many feminists were trying to escape what they saw to be the burdens of housework, raising one's own food actually increased household labor. There were, of course, benefits to this work. These feminists had the opportunity to grow organic food and be freed from the industrial system of agriculture. For others, this work was freeing as it separated them from some of the bonds of capitalism. For those women who had felt that capitalist mentalities had contributed largely to their systematic oppression and the degradation of the environment, they found it empowering to be able to separate themselves from the capital system. For some, their work contributed to their family life in a way that seemed more tangible than producing food before by cooking with products bought from the supermarket. Although some feminists saw the goals of sustainability within ecology as a feminist issue, there are barriers to their ambitions. Even as some feminists advocated for a merge between feminism and ecology, they spoke of some of the downsides. Writer of Feminist Future, Alice Malloy, said, "The ecology movement is blissfully sexist and racist, not committed to the ERA, childcare, abortion rights, affirmative sex and race hiring, abused wife shelters, or protection of the handicapped and elderly. We must fight to make them accept these among their major issues. She said that although many women activists that took part in the ecology movement also took part in the feminist movement, their masculine counterparts did not recognize their work equally. Malloy believed that undoubtedly, as with every other movement, the ecology movement would fall apart without women energy. Ultimately, though, many feminists felt disrespected by the ecology movement for not recognizing their needs. Probably the best illustration of this issue is an actual illustration by Joe Nesbitt. The comic Alice's Alternative Adventures with Atman, as you can see pictured on the slide, Atman's is short for alternative man, describes how for many, communal life was not what they had initially imagined. In the comic, Alice is fed up with her current heteronormative family. She is tired of her thankless household tasks and is easily persuaded to run away to a commune with the superhero Atman. When she gets to the commune, she is excited to find health foods such as 100% compost-grown flour and sprout wine. She thinks that here she will finally live in a world of gender equality. However, she is soon dismayed when she finds out that the men on the commune are not participating equally in the household tasks. When she speaks with the mother about how much she must enjoy having her bloke share the childcare with her, the woman replies that he is actually unable to help because he is too preoccupied working on his book about alternative parenthood, the male role in childcare. The irony of the communal life here is made obvious. Men on some of the communes spoke boldly about gender equality, but were unwilling to forfeit any of their actual privilege. In fact, when Alice confronts them about it by calling a house meeting to discuss work sharing and house roles, the men reply with excuses such as, "Ideally, I'd love to help sisters, but I can't do a thing for the next 2 weeks. I've got to finish me handbook on building your own barricades, and prepare 6 lectures on exploitation in the home, a dialectic approach, and course it'll all be different after the revolution. No point in getting impatient now, though. And this housework thing just isn't my trip. It's all a bourgeois fetish anyway." Alice feels truly deceived. She came to the commune searching for gender equality and healthful living. Now she is not only responsible for the 3 biological children of her own, but for the childcare of the whole commune. She says, call this living? Slaving away day in and day out for 5 blooming men and 14 blooming kids? What we need here is some alternatives. Oh, where do we go from here? Alice feels frustrated. Her utopia did not exist, and now she does not know what else she can do in order to live without the social burden of being expected to complete domestic food production, other household work, according to her gender, while still living in a more environmentally sustainable manner. The Joe Nesbitt comic is very significant. Communes were wonderful alternatives for some people tired of living in a way that degraded the environment. They allowed for certain individuals to explore different family and living structures and could provide a different economic system as well. Furthermore, when labor divisions were less dependent on gender divide, these spaces allowed for revolutionary work to be accomplished. Communal life did not always turn out the way its participants had expected. Many times, dominant gender roles and stereotypes were replicated within them, and the communes reflected the large systematic issues of the larger society, not only in gender, but racial issues as well. This discussion of the feminist critique in alternative vision for communes, and also in co-ops, and also just critiques of household labor around cooking, as these solutions for food, environmental, and labor issues is just one example of how looking to the past can bolster the fight against climate change. It can better enable activists to know some of the concerns that were already raised. So, to make this more clear, looking at the history of past activist movements can help us in the fight against climate change because we are equipped with the knowledge of what worked and what didn't work from the past. Looking at activists of the past allows us to see the solutions that they were proposing, whether or not they were accepted. We can revisit these solutions as they may actually be great ideas that can help us today. We can also anticipate some kinds of the resistance or backlash that these proposals may face. Looking at the history of environmental movements can alert us to problems our current movements against climate change may face. Environmental activism obviously has its own long history. For example, as Mark Dowley showed in his book Losing Ground, the environmental movements that have gained the most power and have been most promoted in the mainstream tended to prioritize white male leadership and be most attuned to the needs of that group. Dowie has shown how, by looking at the history of environmental organizations, we can learn from their past and now create more diverse organizations representing people from a variety of ethnic and gender and sexual orientations than we have in the past. I'm not alone in advocating for this solution of looking at history to help aid our environmental activism today. Just this past month, James Gustav Speth, a former dean of the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, and J. Philip Thompson III, associate professor of urban planning and politics at MIT, published a piece in The Nation arguing that a radical alliance of black and green could save the world. But first, the two movements will have to rediscover their shared roots in a fundamental critique of an economy and a society that values things more than lives. Many of our environmental problems, like our issues of social justice, haven't gone away. So yes, we can look at the past policies that were proposed to combat climate change or pollution and so forth, even if these policies weren't successful. It's important to study the backlashes too. This conference happens at a time when humanities are facing more resistance in the academy. The arts are fighting for money in these times of austerity, and as departments struggle, they try to justify their existence. But the humanities are vital for combating climate change. History teaches us important lessons. Most importantly, though, history can remind us what it is exactly that we are fighting for. Thank you.